The Boeing 737 was falling from the sky. All systems failed. The experienced pilots were helpless, shouting, "We're going to crash." Then a quiet 12-year-old girl walked into the cockpit and said, "I know how to save us." Nobody believed her until she started explaining exactly what was killing them. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Maya Chin sat quietly in the airport waiting area, her eyes focused on her tablet screen. At 12 years old, she was traveling alone from Denver to Chicago to visit her grandmother. The other passengers saw just another kid waiting for her flight. They had no idea that this quiet girl was watching a documentary about one of the worst plane crashes in history. "Flight 447 is now boarding," announced the gate agent. Maya gathered her small backpack and joined the line. Inside her bag were 3 aviation books, a notebook full of technical drawings, and her tablet loaded with dozens of plane crash documentaries. Flight attendant Jessica approached Maya with a warm smile. "Hi sweetie, I'm Jessica and I'll be taking care of you today. Are you excited about your first solo flight?" Maya looked up politely. "It's actually my 3rd solo flight and yes, I'm looking forward to it. Flying is statistically much safer than driving." Jessica laughed. "You're a smart little girl. What are you watching on your tablet? Cartoons?" "No, it's a documentary about United Flight 232. The DC-10 that crashed in Sioux City in 1989 after losing all hydraulic systems. Captain Al Haynes managed to control the plane using only engine thrust. 185 people survived what should have been impossible." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. She exchanged a worried look with her colleague Mark. "That sounds a bit intense for someone your age. I have some coloring books and word puzzles if you'd prefer something more fun." Maya shook her head. "Thank you, but I find aviation accident investigations very interesting. I've been studying them for 3 years." Mark whispered to Jessica, "What kind of parents let their 12-year-old watch plane crash shows? That's morbid." Jessica nodded. "Kids don't really understand what they're watching anyway. She probably just likes the dramatic parts." As passengers boarded the Boeing 737, Maya found her window seat in row 12. The businessman in the middle seat, Robert, glanced at her tablet screen and chuckled. "Flying alone? You're brave for such a young lady." Maya didn't look up from her screen, which showed technical diagrams of hydraulic systems. Statistically, this Boeing 737-800 has an excellent safety record. The chance of an accident is approximately 1 in 11 million flights. The elderly woman in the aisle seat, Helen, leaned forward. "My goodness, you know a lot about airplanes. Are you studying to be a pilot?" "Not exactly," Maya replied, finally looking up. "I study aviation accidents and how crews solve emergency situations. Most people think it's weird for a kid to be interested in plane crashes, but I find it fascinating how pilots and engineers solve impossible problems under pressure." Robert raised his eyebrows. "That's quite unusual for someone your age. Shouldn't you be interested in normal kid stuff like video games or movies?" Maya pulled out her notebook, filled with detailed sketches of aircraft systems, emergency procedures and accident timelines. "I do play some games, but I prefer learning about real situations where people had to think quickly to save lives. Like Captain Chesley Sullenberger landing in the Hudson River, or Captain Eric Moody flying British Airways 009 through volcanic ash that shut down all 4 engines." Helen looked uncomfortable. "Dear, don't you think those stories are a bit frightening? Maybe you should watch something happier." "They're not frightening when you understand the science and procedures behind them," Maya explained. "Fear usually comes from not understanding something. When you know how systems work and how people solve problems, it's actually reassuring." The adults exchanged glances that clearly said they thought Maya was an unusual child with disturbing interests. They had no idea that her 3 years of intensive study had made her more knowledgeable about aviation emergencies than most commercial pilots. In the cockpit, Captain James Morrison completed his pre-flight checklist with First Officer Sarah Collins. Morrison had 25 years of experience and over 30,000 flight hours. Collins was newer but competent, with 8,000 hours of flying time. "Weather looks perfect today," Morrison said. "Should be smooth sailing to Chicago. I see we have an unaccompanied minor on board." Collins checked the passenger manifest. 12-year-old girl. "Jessica will keep an eye on her. These solo flights can be tough on kids," Morrison noted. "Good thing Jessica's great with children." Neither pilot noticed the small maintenance note buried in their paperwork about intermittent electrical anomalies under investigation, cleared for service. The mechanics had run tests but couldn't reproduce the problem, so they signed off on the aircraft as airworthy. 30 minutes into the flight, Maya was deep into a documentary about multiple system failures when she felt the first sign of trouble. The cabin lights flickered briefly. Most passengers didn't notice, but Maya immediately looked up from her screen. She had seen this exact symptom in a documentary about electrical system cascading failures. Her heart rate increased slightly, but not from fear, from recognition. She quietly closed her documentary and opened her notebook to a section labeled Multiple System Emergencies. 5 minutes later, the lights flickered again, this time staying dim for several seconds. The businessman next to her finally noticed. Probably just normal electrical stuff, Robert said dismissively. Maya knew better. She had studied enough accidents to recognize that intermittent electrical problems often preceded major system failures. She began mentally reviewing emergency procedures for electrical malfunctions. In the cockpit, warning lights began appearing on the instrument panel. Captain Morrison frowned as he saw the first indication of electrical problems. "Sarah, are you seeing this? We're getting some electrical anomalies." Collins checked her displays. Confirmed. Multiple electrical circuits showing intermittent failures. Nothing critical yet, but it's spreading. Morrison reached for his emergency checklist. "Let's run through the electrical malfunction procedures." But as they began the checklist, a new problem emerged. Hydraulic system pressure began dropping rapidly. Red warning lights illuminated across the cockpit as alarms started sounding. "We're losing hydraulic pressure," Collins announced. Both systems showing rapid fluid loss. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Electrical problems were manageable. Hydraulic problems were serious. Both together created a dangerous situation that was rarely encountered in training. "Declare an emergency," he ordered. "Contact Chicago approach and request immediate vectors for emergency landing." Collins reached for the radio, but when she pressed the transmit button, only static came through the speakers. She tried different frequencies with the same result. "Captain, radio is dead. We've lost communication." Morrison's 25 years of experience had never prepared him for this exact combination of failures. 3 major systems, electrical, hydraulic, and communication, failing simultaneously was beyond the scope of normal emergency training. In the cabin, passengers were beginning to notice problems. The lights continued flickering, and they could feel the plane's flight characteristics changing as the pilots struggled with compromised controls. Maya recognized every symptom. She had watched documentaries about similar cascading failures and knew exactly what was happening. More importantly, she knew what needed to be done. While other passengers began to panic, Maya calmly gathered her notebook and walked toward the front of the aircraft. Flight attendant Jessica intercepted her near the galley. "Sweetie, you need to return to your seat. We're experiencing some technical difficulties and I need you to stay buckled in." Maya looked directly at Jessica with surprisingly mature composure. "You're having cascading system failures. Electrical malfunction leading to hydraulic fluid loss and communication system breakdown. The pilots are going to need help with emergency procedures that aren't covered in standard training." Jessica stared at Maya in shock. "What did you just say?" "The symptoms indicate multiple primary system failures occurring simultaneously. This is similar to several historical accidents I've studied, but the combination is unique. The flight crew will need to use unconventional recovery procedures." Maya opened her notebook to a page filled with technical diagrams and detailed notes. "This is like United 232 combined with elements of Continental 1713 and Eastern 401. The pilots need to use differential thrust for directional control while attempting manual reversion of flight controls and preparing for emergency landing without normal hydraulic assistance." Jessica realized she was listening to technical knowledge that went far beyond anything a normal 12-year-old should know. The diagrams in Maya's notebook looked professional, with detailed annotations about system interactions and emergency procedures. Over the intercom, Captain Morrison's voice was tense but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing mechanical difficulties and will be diverting for an emergency landing. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." The cabin erupted in worried murmurs and some crying. Several passengers began frantically calling relatives on their cell phones. The businessman next to Maya's empty seat looked around nervously. "Where did that kid go?" Robert asked Helen. "I don't know, but I hope someone's keeping an eye on her." "Children shouldn't be wandering around during emergencies," Helen replied. Meanwhile, Maya continued explaining the situation to Jessica. "The electrical failure is causing pump malfunctions in the hydraulic system. The communication loss is secondary to electrical problems. But the real danger is that these failures will cascade into flight control and engine management systems. Jessica felt overwhelmed. How do you know all this? I've spent 3 years studying aviation accidents and emergency procedures. My parents think it's morbid, but I've learned about system interactions that most pilots never encounter because they're so rare. Maya flipped to another page in her notebook showing detailed procedures. The pilots need to establish manual control using asymmetric thrust, verify fuel system integrity, and prepare for approach and landing without hydraulic assistance. They also need to try emergency communication frequencies and prepare passengers for abnormal landing procedures. The plane shook as the pilots struggled with increasingly difficult controls. Jessica made a decision that went against her training but felt necessary given the extraordinary circumstances. "Come with me," she told Maya. Jessica led Maya to the cockpit door and knocked urgently. "Captain Morrison, I have a passenger who says she can help with the emergency situation." From inside came Morrison's frustrated response. "Jessica, we're extremely busy right now trying to save this aircraft. We can't deal with passenger concerns." "Sir, she has technical knowledge about the failures you're experiencing. She knows about multiple system emergencies." The cockpit door opened immediately. Captain Morrison looked out and saw a small 12-year-old girl holding a notebook filled with professional-looking technical diagrams. "What is this about?" he demanded, clearly stressed but desperate for any help. Maya spoke clearly and confidently. "Captain, you're experiencing cascading system failures affecting electrical, hydraulic, and communication systems. This combination creates control problems that aren't addressed in standard emergency procedures because they rarely occur together." Morrison stared at her in amazement. She had just described their exact situation using precise technical terminology. "How could you possibly know that?" he asked. "I study aviation accidents and emergency procedures. This scenario is similar to several historical incidents, but the combination is unique. You need to use techniques from multiple different emergency procedures simultaneously." First Officer Collins looked over Morrison's shoulder at Maya's notebook. The diagrams were accurate and detailed, showing system interconnections and failure cascades. "Captain, she's describing our situation perfectly," Collins said quietly. Maya continued urgently. "Your hydraulic systems are failing because electrical pumps are malfunctioning. You need to attempt manual reversion for flight controls while using differential thrust for directional control. Your fuel system may also be affected, creating asymmetric loading that will make the aircraft harder to manage." Morrison realized this child knew more about their emergency than he did. In 25 years of flying, he had trained for each of these problems individually, but never all occurring together. "What do you recommend?" he asked. Maya opened her notebook to a detailed procedure she had developed. "First, check fuel distribution and transfer systems. Electrical failures often affect fuel pumps, creating unbalanced loads. Second, establish manual flight control using stick and rudder techniques combined with asymmetric engine thrust. Third, attempt communication on emergency frequencies 121.5 and 243.0 using backup radio systems." Collins immediately checked the fuel gauges. "Captain, she's right. We're showing uneven fuel distribution between wings. The pumps aren't maintaining balance." Maya had learned about this specific problem from studying an accident where pilots didn't realize their fuel management system had failed along with other systems. The resulting imbalance made the aircraft uncontrollable. "Also," Maya continued, "your backup instruments should still be functional if you can access them manually. The electrical failure may have disabled primary displays, but mechanical instruments in the emergency panel should provide basic flight information." Morrison handed Maya his emergency checklist. "Show me what you mean." Maya flipped through the checklist quickly, pointing out procedures. "These are designed for single-system failures. You need to combine techniques. Use the engine failure procedures for directional control, but keep both engines running at different power settings. Use electrical failure backup procedures, but maintain manual hydraulic pressure through the emergency hand pump." She showed them a page in her notebook where she had worked out combination procedures for multiple failures. "I developed this after studying 5 different accidents where single failure procedures weren't adequate for complex emergencies." For the next 30 minutes, Maya stood in the cockpit helping 2 experienced pilots work through problems they had never encountered in training or actual flight experience. Her unconventional education through accident documentaries provided solutions that formal pilot training had never covered. When the landing gear wouldn't extend normally due to hydraulic failure, Maya suggested using gravity-assisted extension with manual backup pressure. When altitude instruments became unreliable due to electrical problems, she helped them calculate descent rates using engine power settings and timing methods. When they couldn't contact air traffic control on normal frequencies, Maya knew which emergency channels to try and how to signal their distress using transponder codes that would alert ground controllers to their situation. The most important thing, Maya explained as they approached Chicago, is the landing itself. Without normal hydraulics, you'll need to come in faster than normal and use maximum reverse thrust immediately upon touchdown. The electrical problems mean your wheel brakes may not function properly, so you'll depend on aerodynamic braking and engine reversal to stop. Captain Morrison looked at this remarkable child who had become their technical advisor during the worst crisis of his career. Maya, how did you learn all this? I watched documentaries about plane accidents and read accident investigation reports. I wanted to understand how people survive impossible situations. I study what went wrong and what pilots did to save lives. But you're only 12 years old, Collins said in amazement. Maya shrugged. Age doesn't matter when you're genuinely interested in learning something. I've probably watched more accident investigation shows than most pilots see in their entire careers. As they prepared for emergency landing at O'Hare Airport, Maya helped them review procedures that combined elements from multiple historical emergencies. She had them prepare for a landing that would be faster, harder, and more dangerous than anything in their training. Remember, she told them, once you touch down, don't try to make it smooth. Get the plane on the ground firmly, then use maximum reverse thrust immediately. The electrical problems mean many of your normal landing systems won't work, so you have to rely on basic aerodynamics and engine braking. The approach was difficult. Flying with compromised controls, unreliable instruments, and no radio contact with the tower, Captain Morrison had to rely on visual cues and the techniques Maya had taught him. She stood behind the pilot's seats, calmly calling out altitude and airspeed estimates when their instruments failed. You're coming in a little fast, but that's good, Maya said. Better too fast than too slow with these control problems. Remember to keep the nose up until the main wheels touch, then get it down quickly for maximum braking effectiveness. The landing was rough but successful. The plane hit the runway hard, bounced twice but stayed upright and under control. The pilots used every technique Maya had taught them: asymmetric thrust for steering, manual flight controls, and aggressive braking procedures. Fire trucks and ambulances surrounded the aircraft as it finally rolled to a stop, but everyone on board was alive and uninjured. The emergency was over, thanks largely to the knowledge of a 12-year-old girl who had spent years studying aviation disasters. As passengers waited in the terminal after evacuation, the full story emerged. Captain Morrison made an announcement that shocked everyone who heard it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that our safe landing today was made possible by passenger Maya Chen. This 12-year-old girl has more knowledge about complex emergency procedures than most pilots will encounter in their entire careers. Her study of aviation accidents provided the expertise we needed to handle multiple system failures that aren't covered in any training manual. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The businessman who had sat next to Maya felt embarrassed about dismissing her technical knowledge. The elderly woman who had worried about her watching disturbing documentaries realized that Maya's unusual interest had saved all their lives. Flight attendant Jessica approached Maya with tears in her eyes. Maya, I owe you a huge apology. I thought you were just a child who needed to be entertained with coloring books and games. I had no idea you were carrying knowledge that would save our lives. Maya smiled quietly. It's okay. Most people think my hobby is weird or morbid. But I've always believed that understanding dangerous situations helps you prevent or survive them. Knowledge is power, even when it comes from unusual sources. The story made international news within hours. A 12-year-old girl with no formal flight training had saved 156 people by applying knowledge gained from watching documentaries about aviation disasters. Experts from the Federal Aviation Administration and National Transportation Safety Board were amazed at her understanding of complex systems and emergency procedures. Dr. Robert Johnson, a leading aviation safety expert, commented to reporters, "This young lady has demonstrated knowledge of system interactions and emergency procedures that go beyond what we teach in most commercial pilot training programs. Her self-directed education in accident investigation has given her insights that our formal training systems have missed." Maya's parents flew from Denver to Chicago to meet their daughter. Her mother cried when she realized that her daughter's morbid fascination with plane crashes had actually been preparation for becoming a hero. "I'm so sorry we ever told you to stop watching those shows," her mother said, hugging Maya tightly. We thought it was unhealthy for a child to be so interested in disasters. Maya hugged her parents back. It's okay, Mom. I know it seems strange. But I learned that the best way to prevent tragedies is to understand them completely. By studying what goes wrong, you learn how to make things go right. Captain Morrison personally recommended Maya for recognition from the FAA and several aviation organizations. In his official report, he wrote, Passenger Maya Chin provided technical expertise during a complex emergency that exceeded the scope of our training and experience. Her knowledge of system failures and emergency procedures was instrumental in achieving a successful outcome. This incident demonstrates that expertise can come from unexpected sources and that unconventional education can provide valuable insights. Maya returned to school as a celebrity, but she remained the same quiet, studious girl who preferred learning to playing video games. Her classmates now understood that her unusual interests weren't just weird hobbies, they represented the kind of deep knowledge that could save lives in critical situations. Her teachers began incorporating her story into lessons about the value of curiosity and self-directed learning. Maya became an example of how following your genuine interests, even when others don't understand them, can lead to extraordinary outcomes. The story of Flight 447 became a case study in aviation schools and emergency response training programs. It demonstrated that sometimes the most important expertise comes from the least expected sources, and that age and formal credentials are less important than genuine knowledge and understanding. Maya continued her studies of aviation safety, eventually pursuing formal education in aerospace engineering and accident investigation. But she never forgot the day when her unusual hobby stopped being just a personal interest and became the key to survival for everyone on board Flight 447. The lesson was clear and powerful. Never underestimate what someone knows based on their age or appearance. The quiet 12-year-old girl watching plane crash documentaries in seat 12A turned out to be exactly the expert needed when disaster struck. Her story proved that curiosity, dedication, and genuine interest in learning can prepare you to help others in ways you never imagined. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you least expect, even if she's just 12 years old and everyone thinks she should be coloring instead of studying aviation emergencies.